Howdy, welcome back to Wobble Enjoy Sports. If you're new around here, hope I can get you to consider to like the content and subscribe to the channel. But if you are a regular around these here parts, thank you very much for the continued support. Today, I'm going to look at the New Zealand Warriors fixture for 2025. And one of the big things that sticks out to me upon review is that between round number 4 and round 15, New Zealand Warriors only have 2 games at Go Media Stadium. The Wars are going to be the first cab off the rank a couple of times in 2025. Next week, the New Zealand Warriors are away to the Cronulla Sutherland Sharks in the first game of the pre-season. It starts next week. Week number 2, they host Melbourne in the city of Hamilton. Let's get into their season proper now. And they are going to be one of the first 2 teams to kick off officially the NRL season in Las Vegas at Allegiant Stadium against the Canberra Raiders. And technically, they're the away side in this contest, but that match is Sunday, the 2nd of March, 10 a.m. for Queenslanders. Raiders and Warriors, the first game of the NRL season out there at Las Vegas. They then have the week off. So they're not back in action until the 14th of March. They have 2 weeks away. And then they have back-to-back home games. One against the Manly Warringah Seagulls for Friday night footy, and it's the same time slot against the Sydney Roosters in round number 3. Round number 4, they're away. They travel back to Sydney to take on the West Tigers, or I should say it's their first trip to Sydney for 2025. And then they have their first bye for 2025 in round number 5. 2 home games at Go Media Stadium, the 1 trip to Sydney, and then the big marquee event as well. Not a bad start. There's toughness in there for sure, but not a bad start if you're a New Zealand Warriors fan, or at least in my opinion anyway. Part 2 for 2025 is the beginning of a 2 to 3 month stretch where I think this is the most critical part of the New Zealand Warriors season, and it begins with an away trip against the Melbourne Storm. Sunday, 2 o'clock. 1 week later, they're back in familiar surrounds. They host the Brisbane Broncos Saturday twilight footy here in Australia. That's Saturday night footy over in Auckland. It is the start of 3 home games, technically, but their second home game is emanating from Christchurch at Apollo Project Stadium. This is an Anzac Day night game in New Zealand. So it's 6 p.m. kickoff here in Australia. The Warriors versus the Newcastle Knights. Round 9, they're still technically the home team, but this time they're at Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane for Magic Round, and they're hosting the North Queensland Cowboys on Saturday. It's a twilight fixture as well. And to finish out part 2 for 2025, they are away to the Dragons at WIN Stadium in Wollongong. So in part 2 there, Storm, Broncos, North Queensland, and then you've got the Newcastle Knights and the St George Illawarra Dragons. 3 of those games are technically home games, but every home game is at a different venue. Section 3, they kick things off with their second trip to Suncorp Stadium in 3 weeks. They go up to take on the Dolphins for Saturday afternoon footy. That's a 3 p.m. kickoff. Round number 12 is going to be a split round, so Origin representation will be happening. Besides Mitch Barnett, I can't think of anything off the top of the head at the moment. I mean, it's January. I'm not thinking about State of Origin just friggin' yet. But it's the Warriors versus the Canberra Raiders, Sunday Channel 9 footy for the Wars. And then they're on the road back-to-back weeks. Round number 13, they take on the South Sydney Rabbitohs from Accor Stadium. That is Sunday, 2 o'clock. And then they play Saturday twilight footy against the Sharks at Shark Park. And to round out number 3, or part 3 I should say, they have their second bye for 2025. So in that section there, they're on the road 3 weeks out of the 5. One of them is a bye, and then they do have a home game against the Raiders as well. That game against the South Sydney Rabbitohs is going to be a couple of days after the first Origin game in Brisbane. So maybe South Sydney will play players, or maybe they will rest them. So that could be a pretty nice opportunity to snare an away win for the New Zealand Warriors. Part 4 for the New Zealand Warriors starts with arguably their most anticipated match for 2025. They are taking on the Penrith Panthers at Go Media Stadium Saturday 3 p.m. here in Australia. But the unfortunate thing about this contest is while it's James Fisher-Harris versus his old club, it's a couple of days after the Perth State of Origin match, and the likes of Cleary and Dylan Edwards potentially, the whole Penrith Panther Origin contingent may not actually play in this game to go from Perth all the way to New Zealand. If I'm Coach Ivan Cleary, I'm saying no thank you. You boys are going to be resting for sure that weekend. So that really does take the gloss off this contest, but still the fact remains James Fisher-Harris versus the Penrith Panthers in round 16 to kick things off for part 4. For the New Zealand Warriors. Then they're on the road to Suncorp Stadium. I think that makes it 3 Suncorp games in 9 weeks for the New Zealand Warriors. They take on the Brizzy Broncos in what will be a fully loaded game. That will be a really cool contest. They then have their 3rd and final bye for 2025 in round 18. So they have 2 byes in the space of a month. So I've said it a couple of times, but I don't know how to actually feel about teams that have 2 byes in the space of a month or even 6 weeks, to be honest with you. But that's the fact that the New Zealand Warriors have a bye in round number 18, and that's during the split round. Round 19, they're back at home again. They take on the West Tigers at Go Media Stadium Sunday, 2 o'clock, and that's a couple of days after Game 3, State of Origin. So we'll see if, for example, a Jerome Luai backs up if he is selected to play in game number 3. So part 4 for the New Zealand Warriors, they take on Penrith, Brisbane, the West Tigers, and they have a bye. But that game against the Panthers is going to be Originless. I'm going to put some house money down, and I'm going to say that the Origin contingent will not play in that game against James Fisher-Harris. But to think that James Fisher-Harris will still be going head-to-head against Moses Leota in that game is going to be worth the price of admission alone. I got to say, with all due respect to the teams that I'm about to say or announce, the New Zealand Warriors' run to the finals might be the best and, in inverted commas, easiest run to the finals for 2025 that I've seen so far. If they're alive and kicking, what does their run to the finals look like? In round number 20, they have an away game against the Newcastle Knights, Sunday Channel 9 footy. They then have back-to-back home games. The Gold Coast Titans come in on a Saturday, and then on a Friday, the Dolphins come into town. They're then on the road against the Bulldogs for Saturday night footy, and that's going to be a Channel 9 game as well. That's happening out at Accor Stadium. Now, this is their shortest turnaround for 2025, however. So they play on the Saturday night. They won't leave, surely. I wouldn't think so. I don't know. But anyway, I would imagine they would be leaving for New Zealand early in the morning, Sunday morning. They then have a home game on Thursday night footy against the St. George Illawarra Dragons in what will be 2 Thursday night footy games in round number 24. So that's a very short turnaround and a very rare occurrence, maybe the first ever occurrence if you take out like an Anzac Day or if you take out an Easter game. Thursday night games don't usually happen in Auckland, but it's happening in round 24 against the Dragons, and it's coming off a really short turnaround as well. They then travel to the Gold Coast to take on the Titans for Saturday twilight footy. Their final home game of the season is on a Friday night against the Parramatta Eels, and the final game of the home and away regular season for the Warriors is against Manly at 4 Pines Park. In the run to the finals, they take on the Gold Coast Titans twice. They host the Dolphins. They take on Newcastle, who I think they can absolutely challenge. I'd say that their toughest opposition in all of that is going to be at 4 Pines Park against Manly in the final round of the home and away regular season. And the Dogs as well in Sydney. That will provide a really stern test and is a rematch of one of the best games of 2024 as well. But that run to the finals for the Warriors is extremely achievable. If the Warriors are thereabouts in, let's say, 11th spot, and they have that run to the finals, they're going to make teams sweat big time, man. They're going to make a huge charge if they're in form and if they're healthy as well. But that's their run to the finals, and it's a pretty good one. My opinion on the New Zealand Warriors draw for 2025 is I think it's one of the kinder draws. It's certainly not easy. There's some difficult periods, especially that part 2 to part 3 section where they only have 2 home games at Go Media Stadium in the space of 2 months, thereabouts. But in terms of opposition strength, they take on Broncos twice. The other team that they take on twice are the Manly Warringah Sea Eagles. Besides that, it's Raiders, Dragons, Tigers, Titans, and Dolphins. And I think there might be another team in there, but there are other teams like South Sydney who are taking on Melbourne, Brisbane, Penrith, Manly, Sharks twice this year. Warriors only got to do it twice against Brisbane and twice against Manly. And with all due respect to the other clubs, the Warriors, they can win those other games. I think it's, in terms of opposition, the Warriors, if they can rediscover their 2023 form in some way, shape or another, they can do it. They can snap or snare a top 8 berth for sure, but they gotta be switched on, man. And a lot of pressure is going to come on the shoulders of Luke Metcalf this season, I believe. I really, touch wood, hope he has an injury-free year because he looks to be such a special player. But I think if the Warriors are going to do it, they are going to have to rely a bit on Luke Metcalf, but they should be inspired by James Fisher-Harris's signing as well. And it sounds like RTS is going to stay at fullback, in the centre position, and it's going to be a battle between CNK and Tuapiki for the fullback slots. So a lot of people aren't really high on the New Zealand Warriors this year, but I don't know. I kind of got a good feeling about the Warriors, just the way that fixture's been done in and how the team might look. But we'll see what happens. It's the New Zealand Warriors. You never friggin' know. I hope you enjoyed that video. Thank you very much for your continuous support. And I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you. Take care. Adios. #RidenHigh 2025.